Thank you so much for the wonderful introduction, Emma. And thank you all for having me here today. I'm just trying to adjust my eyes to the sea of blackness and faces lit up by mobile phones, so I'll try and figure it out. But it's great to be here and be able to meet and talk with so many people doing incredible work in museums and galleries across Finland. And it's especially wonderful to be here at Amos Rex as well, which you'll be pleased to know has made quite a stir in London, and all my colleagues in the museum sector are talking about this place. So it's been great to see it for myself. So in terms of my talk, I'm going to talk a little bit about my experience in working in digital participation in galleries. I'll be coming from the angle very much of art and design, which is my background, so do bear that in mind, but also very much from a UK perspective. So much like Peter, please do try to draw parallels between what's happening inside the UK and what's happening here inside Finland too. And there might be some fertile points for discussion once I've finished speaking shortly. So today I want to talk about digital engagement and museums, but not necessarily about websites, apps, YouTube, or Snapchat, but rather face-to-face encounters in hybrid spaces, where the walls and galleries of the museum and collections meet with visitors, with us, the museum staff, and with digital tools and platforms. And I propose that by creating these hybrid experiences of tangible and digital worlds, we open up possibilities to expand the definition of what digital engagement is. It allows us to meet and interact with our audiences in a much more personal manner and create active experiences. We have the opportunity to create and design these experiences which change what people know, how they feel, and what they leave with after the visit. So when talking about digital trends, I often get asked the question, what's the next big thing, or what do you think will change within the next 10 years? I never get asked the question, what do you think isn't going to change? What's going to stay the same? And that second question is always the more important of the two. It's one that you can build a strategy around, one which stays stable and stays useful over time. When something you know is true and fundamental over the long term, you can afford to put your energy into it. I would suggest that in finding the core mission of your collection, your organisation, you're trying to find what the value for your visitors is. Many places forget this, but as public organisations for the people, we need to focus outwards. For me, over the past few years, this has been around inspiration, creativity, invention and innovation. And I came across this note, which is a little bit whimsical, but which I thought sums up creativity quite well. It says that being creative isn't a magical thing. It's magic. It's a wonderful thing. It's not a superpower. It's not something that you're born with, and it's not exclusive to certain people. We, as museum educators, those working in museum learning, curators and public programmers can help people really tap into their creativity. So a little bit about my background and where I'm coming from. In my roles at both the V&A, the UK's National Museum of Art, Design and Performance, and at the Museum of London, a museum which covers the history of the city from prehistoric times through to the present day. I've been embedded within learning and education teams. My background is in teaching, although throughout my life I've enjoyed tinkering with technology. As a child, I would regularly get into trouble after finding a screwdriver and poking it into a video player, into stereos, anything with an electrical plug I'd be quite happy to take apart. However, I was really encouraged by my family to be creative with this, probably at great expense to them, and to re-engineer and to break things to see how it works. And it's always interesting to think about that the act of making often begins with the act of breaking something. And although I've been based within learning and education, my work at both institutions covered much more than just that. There's been a blurring in many places between the roles that individuals do and their engagement with public and collections. At the V&A, it was common to find curators doing public programming and doing educational project work, and for learning teams to be curating displays and to be working in the archives. This interdisciplinary practice demonstrates the changing nature of museums and how we engage with our audiences. That need to communicate, to have dialogue with, and to directly meet your public is at the front and center of 21st century museological practice. Alongside that, having the words digital in my job titles at both places has been quite a blessing. I would often find myself drawn into different areas of practice, brought in as a digital expert in places where I really wasn't an expert. But this allowed me to really look at how we embedded learning, how we embedded education across all different areas of activity within the museum, from marketing to publishing and to exhibitions work, and really expanded my kind of working practice on what engagement is. That said, this interdisciplinary practice is quite often the affordance of larger, more digitally mature organizations, as they often have more resources, contacts, a high profile, more internal expertise to make the most of technology. It is often to them that we look for best practice. However, the democratization of digital tools and platforms has seen many smaller places work without the hierarchy and pressure of being in high-profile museums. At the opposite end of the scale, I'm currently working on a project where digital engagement is something completely new. Most places know that they need to engage with their audiences in new ways, but are unsure of how to, lacking the resources and skills to effectively communicate, commission, and to carry out digital work. And it's been a pleasure for me recently to work within a 12th century church, not far from where I live, and work on a large funding bid to conserve mural paintings by the 20th century British artists Duncan Grant and Vanessa Bell from the nearby Charleston farmhouse. And coming to the V&A to South England's rolling green hills has been quite a culture shock. Nobody has asymmetric hairstyles or wears beautiful scarf so much. And instead, my meetings for the last couple of months have been in the vicar's garden as chickens peck around our feet drinking tea. But what a great challenge to work with a completely different type of place and to think about what digital engagement means to a place like this, a rural church with its own community and congregation, but one which has national reputation as a home of beautiful art too. So what does digital engagement look like in a place like this? What kind of impact does it want to make on its audiences? And these are the types of questions that are being dealt with across the cultural sector, and some that I want to tackle today. So in terms of a little bit of context around UK, the dialogue around digital participation is usually framed around education and around the economy. Over in recent years, there's been a drive to create a digitally skilled workforce, leaving schools and universities who will drive the digital commercial sector. A key report from Nesta called NextGen, and Nesta is the UK's innovation lab, works with key drivers in the industry from games companies, software developers, special effects teams for movies, to identify some of the missing skill sets from the workers they needed. And although a number of these digital industries they spoke to could be classed as creative, the outcome was to implement a computer science curriculum across all ages in schools, which tended to neglect the arts. By the age of 5, children in British schools should be able to define what an algorithm is and create one themselves. And often when I ask that to people I'm speaking to, there's quite a blank look on their faces. So it's quite a radical change. And the curriculum is very much heavily technically focused. But why should museums and galleries care about this? Well, culture and museums should care because digital literacy, engagement and creativity is multifaceted and contains so much more than just technical aspects. Digital literacies enable artists to create spectacular visions, such as the amazing Team Lab exhibition here, as well as understand, create, and access culture, and the culture that we as museums and galleries put online. But what is the context of that literacy? The differentiation of illiterates and literates is very much a range of greys. It's not a binary thing. It's a contested term which encompasses creative and critical skills that allow for the creation, understanding, and sharing meaning through digital media. But there is no one umbrella term or definition of what digital literacy is. Doug Belshaw had a stab at this and tried to create a number of digital literacies, 8 in total in fact, which all begin with C, which must have taken up quite a bit of time of his PhD thesis to be able to do that. But even so, it's a very useful kind of framework for understanding some of the aspects of digital literacy and the lens to look through. And looking at these, probably you can see that technical aspects don't form up the majority of them, but rather we see things like cultural, that literacy is redefined as a result of technological change. That there are cognitive literacies, the ability to use technology tools alongside the cognitive thinking processes which help us use them. That there is communication which has been changed by technology and understanding the affordances of that. But also that there is a creative adaptation of technology and risk-taking and experimentation, and a critical element, understanding how technology is changing society, our lives, and understanding of the world, as well as the civic aspects of technical literacies, understanding how technology is changing our participation in democracies and helping form social dialogues. But take a look at the article on the left of the screen. I came across in a newspaper a while back, and it talks about an Oxford University publication, The Future of Employment, How Susceptible Are Jobs to Computerization by Carl Benedicti Frey and Michael Osborne. It discussed and investigated the needs of workplaces and their learners in a coming age where artificial intelligence becomes a threat to the workforce. From that article, Andy Haldane, the Bank of England's chief economic advisor, said, school education has tended to focus on developing the core cognitive competencies. For example, reading, writing, and arithmetic. Smart machines have long since surpassed their ability to do the first and third of these, and they are fast catching up on the second. That begs the question of whether there are other skills where humans' comparative advantage is greater. And so from this research, they identified 3 things which they proposed machine learning, artificial intelligence, and computers could never replace. I'd like you to have a quick think about what they might be. So 3 skills, 3 competencies. The 3 things that they identified are creativity, empathy, being nice, understanding people, and human dexterity. And human dexterity really refers to work such as in the care sector, so in nursing. How would you gently move a person from a bed and react to the feedback from them? And so thinking about framing digital participation, digital education, should we be concentrating on these 3 aspects rather than teaching people how to create databases or use Excel, which was very much my education in computing at school? Alongside all of this, there is a renewed interest in authenticity, an interest in traditional handcraft in an increasingly digital world. And this links to many pertinent factors, from sustainability to the desire to reclaim personal power in a world of mass production and mass media. And things such as the Repair Manifesto, which you can see on that side, talk about the power of being able to repair things. As it says, if you can't fix it, you don't own it. We all have technology in our pockets, these shiny black boxes which are opaque and impenetrable. And if they break, we're kind of at a loss as to what to do with them. Across many industries, the power to repair and modify products is being taken away as they become more software-based and filled with tightly controlled and patented software and hardware. There's a growing black market in industries such as the agricultural industry, which allows farmers to hack their own tractors, plows, and combine harvesters. Without this illegal technology in agriculture, they have to use licensed suppliers. It's very expensive, and it takes away their independence and market choice. Repair is a sustainable thing. We understand now that materials are limited, that the waste we create is poisoning the earth. And if we can fix and understand the technology we use, we can make better use of the resources we have and gain useful skills and knowledge along the way. And the same really goes for crafts. In the UK at the moment, there's a great swell of interest in traditional handcrafts. There's endless reality TV competitions on people baking cakes, knitting jumpers, making ceramics. And although these crafts seem old-fashioned, people are rediscovering them in a contemporary age, discovering the joy of learning, using their hands, and that wonderful feeling of being in a flow, creative state. So, how do we think about these trends and how do we relate them to our practice inside museums? And I propose that one way we can do this is by bringing making back into galleries and into museums and encourage people to be hands-on with craft, and especially from my perspective, be hands-on where craft meets technology. At the V&A, we would use a different set of platforms to be able to do this within our public programs. And our largest event of the year was London Design Festival Digital Design Weekend, which I co-curated with my team, and which in fact is happening this coming weekend. So I'll be based in the galleries for 20 hours a day, installing works and being quite stressed. But the Digital Design Weekend attracts around 50,000 visitors to the V&A over the course of 3 days. And it's a chance to meet and engage with contemporary makers, digital artists, designers, and researchers. We invite in 50 or more artists to show their work in the galleries. And one unique thing is we insist that they're present with their work, that they're there alongside it. You can come along as an audience member and you can speak to the maker of that piece. And so putting on the Digital Design Weekend allows us a couple of ways to experiment with the way that we create digital participation and that we engage people with contemporary design, tell stories about our historical collections and how that intersects with new technologies. Firstly, it creates a way for us to bring making back into the galleries. It's almost a weekend where the normal rules of what can happen inside public spaces are relaxed a little bit. So we bring back the act of craft, not just the outputs of it, but the investigation and the process. We encourage work which is still in a prototype or unfinished stage, and it requires some confidence by the maker of that piece to open up their processes, to show something which isn't complete, and to share that with the public. And making is still something which happens in digital ways. It's still something which takes place in people's sheds, in their offices, in their studios, where ideas are tinkered and experimented with, where new approaches are tried and creative solutions then appear. It is just usually that with digital projects, with online websites, apps, or physical pieces of technology, the process is so opaque, so hidden, and so magical to those of us who are just mere humans, not Bill Gates or Elon Musk, that we just see the end product. That product is polished, perfect, and market-tested. But people still want to see the steps which lead to that final thing and see the marks of the maker. So we run open workshops and hack events with artists and organizations, including the Met Office, BBC R&D, Microsoft, and NASA. And these companies are massive. They rely on being seen as magical in some kind of way. By revealing their processes and bringing in the human endeavor and creativity to the forefront of their magic, it creates an opportunity to tell new stories and excite people in new ways. Everyone who takes part there is there with their work, And like I said, you can come along, you can speak to the researchers and find out more and share your feedback with them. And encouraging this type of discussion and reflection on the role of technology in different fields of life, as well as celebrating some of the more exciting research that takes place out there. For the designers, it's an opportunity to get feedback on what they're doing with non-typical audiences. And for the public, they get this privileged opportunity to speak to makers to demystify the act of creativity. Secondly, another approach to the Digital Design Weekend is to create an impact through new experiences that couldn't be had anywhere else or at any time else inside the museum. It allows us to use the galleries in a new way and create these unexpected moments. So in this picture you can see Diamandini, which is a large life-size robot, which uses artificial intelligence and machine learning to adapt its behavior and interaction with people who encounter it. We created an intervention within the Renaissance galleries at the museum, which are filled with classical sculptures, marble on every surface, everywhere. And it blended right in, but this was something that moved and which reacted to you. And I just love the image of those two young girls there. One, this wonderful thing which she's never seen before, and the other girl looks utterly terrified. And that kind of shock within the galleries and that kind of contrast between the historical and the contemporary is something really exciting and a thrill when you see the creative potentials of technology. So thinking in terms of digital engagement, we need to think about what our audiences expect from their museum experiences. And I think experience is the key word there, and where we can meet them in the middle, how we program and what they need. So when we were thinking about how we engage our younger audiences, we spoke to them. We have a large youth advisory committee made up of 50 young people who come along to the museum on Fridays to socialize, to listen to music, to meet designers, to do projects. And they really help to inform how we think about what we're doing. So in terms of what they expect from their experiences, we found the following things. That some of the biggest brands around at the moment are all about making and collaboration. So a couple of examples there might be Minecraft, which is a digital form of Lego where people build together, where people create new worlds, and where they collaborate in order to do that. YouTube is another great example of where people make and where they share and where conversation happens. And all this making and hacking and creating new stuff is about sharing knowledge and about sharing experiences. And what we also found, which is also shown in lots of other parts of research, is that digital tools and platforms are spaces for self-expression for young people. As young people are gradually stripped out and made invisible in the public realm and in public spaces, their behavior increasingly regulated within them, these digital platforms become a space where they can start to explore their identity, their personality, and form their interests. We know that our young audiences want to be able to participate when they're in the galleries. They want active experiences where they can shape and they can create and share media. And that also their understanding of what digital isn't just about the online spaces. It's about where the physical and the digital meet. And this might be through hardware, or it might be through social interactions. So in terms of framing this as an educator, we found that the pedagogy of constructionism is very useful. So in the summary, Martinez and Steger described it as learning by constructing knowledge through the art of making something shareable. And so this is when learners construct mental models in order to understand the world around them, but also use the process of learning as an opportunity to make things physically. And that's the important thing, that there is a physical output of this learning. And constructionism advocates student-centered discovery learning, where students use information they already know to acquire more knowledge. Students learn through participation and project-based learning, where they make connections between different ideas and different areas of knowledge, facilitated by the teacher, or in our case as designers and artists, through coaching rather than through lectures or step-by-step guidance. Further, constructionism holds that learning can happen most effectively when people are making these tangible objects in the real world. In this sense, constructionism is connected with experiential learning and builds on Piaget's theory of constructivism, which holds that individuals bring their own personal memories, interests, values to any learning or knowledge which they hold. And this makes the educator take on the role as the negotiator of subjective experiences. Constructionism says, let's take that personal experience and direct it into the real world, and direct it into physical making as a way to explore these ideas together. So in terms of how we can strategize this to make problem-based learning more effective, especially within museum education, we can think about these 5 kind of strategies. That learning has to be related to some kind of larger task. A larger task is important because it allows students and learners to see that activities can be applied to many different aspects of life. And as a result, those learners are more likely to see the activities that they are doing as useful. Secondly, the learner needs to be supported to feel that they are beginning to have ownership of the overall problem, that they can direct where it's going and what the outcome will be. Thirdly, that the task is authentic and designed for the learner. This means that the task and the learner's cognitive ability have the ability to match problems and make learning valuable. The outputs of their work can then be used to solve part of that problem set for them. As part of all this, reflection is built into the process, so they can think about the process of their learning, and that learners are encouraged to test out their ideas and solutions against different contexts and against different views, so thinking about user testing in many cases. And so when we engage with people and we think of participation, we're really asking, what is the journey that we want to take them on? Where are their aims as visitors, and where do they cross over with our institution? And there lies an opportunity to design an experience which builds deeper engagement with each other. And this is a useful model of how, at this type of scale, how you can affect participation and engagement, and how you can create a roadmap as to where you want to be and where you want to take your audience to. As you can see at one end of the scale, there is engagement is limited. It reaches a high number of people, a large crowd. And as you move along the horizontal scale, the number of people that you're engaging with becomes less, but you can build those deeper relationships, deeper engagement. And so when we think about our general audiences, their visits might be quite passive with little interaction with the museum or collections besides actually just being there. But working within the galleries, making learning and doing opens the door to deeper engagement. Through this, we can develop the audience's confidence in engaging with culture and their capacities, which may be their ability to interpret and understand the collections, or even if workshop-based, their practical skills. Okay. So sometimes that engagement can be quite shallow, and that's okay. And by thinking about your audiences and their needs and expectations, you can create experiences which build on what they want. And these 2 examples are from recent V&A exhibitions, Winnie the Pooh and Botticelli. There were 2 exhibitions with very much mainstream tastes, and both of which attracted many families. Most families going into a museum or gallery will be thinking about a learning experience that they can have together, but the overriding desire is for the creation of memories together as a group. We can meet their needs in the middle, And these activities were about creating souvenirs and memories of their visits, entertaining and working with them to create a learning experience which deepens their engagement with the exhibitions. Both of them used photography and low-tech approaches, including green screen, and they built on already established behaviors. Most families will already be taking photos as a group inside the gallery, so why not direct that experience into something where they have face-to-face engagement with staff? So these two activities, you can see Birth of Venus just behind me. We used a very simple green screen to explore with families pose, composition within his works, and his two most famous paintings, Primavera and The Birth of Venus. And with Winnie the Pooh, we were able to explore storytelling and silhouettes, illustrations with simple shadow photography. And these created both digital and physical outputs, so they would get the digital file as well as a printed copy. We'd encourage families to share these via social media and spread the awareness of what we do through word of mouth and through personal and meaningful engagement with the content of the exhibitions. However, other types of digital engagement can be much deeper, and thinking back to the scale, with much smaller focused groups. The Samsung Digital Classroom is a V&A initiative which was established 3 years ago to fill gaps in the school curriculum around not only digital skills, but around creative subjects. The push towards science, technology, engineering, and mathematics has seen creative subjects stop being offered to students, or so poorly resourced that students have stopped taking them. Since 2010, the number of students taking design as a subject in schools has fallen by 50%. Other creative subjects, such as theatre and dance, the effect has been much more severe, with a 60% drop in student take-up. We wanted to show through this programme that having a solid technical education is not at the loss of creativity in the arts. Students can still learn about the latest engineering, science, and design through technology whilst being creative. Over 6 months, we worked with our young people's panel and local colleges to identify their needs and what excited them and what they felt they needed in order to succeed in a rapidly changing world and workplace. From our consultation with those young people, we found that some important factors which helped us negotiate creating this digital participation were things such as independence, them being able to explore their own interests outside of their formal education, preparation, thinking about their next steps into university or careers, and validation that their interests are real jobs, that being a video games designer is a real job. It's not just playing games all day. And so we started to get an idea of the kind of subjects that we would cover and the sense of creative practice that we could work with. The ones which appeared were either emerging practices which were difficult to teach inside formal education, such as virtual reality and projection mapping, or subjects that students felt they needed more help with and educators were told us were missing from many colleges and schools. And these were quite often really simple things, such as creating digital portfolios for university applications. Many schools still relied on students taking photos of their physical work and just putting those into emails rather than designing digital versions which could be emailed on the application. So it's very much a response to the needs of those students. And typically, our digital workshops took place within our learning studios. As great as these were, a number of factors encouraged us to try a new approach. Whilst we were building a new entrance and galleries to the museum, and the majority of one wing, including our learning centre, was a building site, we moved into a rather dark and hidden away space in the opposite corner, which used to house our textiles archive. These spaces really lacked inspiration and made it difficult for travelling into the galleries across such a massive building, especially when we had students in sessions with mobility issues. So we started to work with students from the Royal College of Arts to rethink what a classroom or studio space inside a museum could be. And so we set around creating a mobile pop-up classroom where creative digital sessions could be held within the galleries. It had to be easily movable, quick to assemble, and the students created a light-up structure with 3D printed joints which could take on different forms and be used in different contexts. We would take this out into the galleries, and we were able to run truly open public sessions, engaging people with creative practice in front of the collections which had inspired them. And within the galleries, this created a beacon for learning, not only for our visitors, but also institutionally, positioning it as a key activity alongside displaying, preserving, and communicating our collections. It created a pop-up space for learning within the public areas. It reinvigorated the historic architecture of the museum and brought the contemporary in alongside it. And so the projects which happened in this were manifold, but however, sometimes the making and learning was still better situated in studio spaces, but there was still an opportunity to take the outputs of that out into the galleries. Being able to share the work which was created inside these sessions and display it to the public creates a virtuous circle with our learners taking part. They were able to see a project through from beginning to end, understanding the total process from the seeds of ideas to iteration through to letting it go into the public realm. Synchronicity was an interactive installation which reveals a journey through imaginary cities. We worked with the artist Michele Panagrossi and 16 to 24-year-olds taking part in the digital classroom, and installed the installation in February in the Sackler Center at the museum. Over 3 days, students learned about projection mapping, digital animation, and interactive sensors before building their own interactive work for display. Working with coding, animation, and projection mapping, students were led through the process of creating a narrative to their work, and then to the technical aspects of realizing their ideas. Speaking to the users of the museum and understanding how they use the galleries and interactives helped inform their process. The final step of showing the digital artwork, the young people installed and went through the process of setting up their display. As installed in the Sackler Center for a total of 2 weeks, enjoyed nearly 2,000 visitors of all ages. It was based on the 1972 novel Invisible Cities by Italo Calvino, and the table encourages you to explore, communicate, and collaborate with others to discover different interactions, sounds, and animation. But digital engagement doesn't have to be something that you do with people who are just coming through your doors or visiting your website. Sometimes that engagement come through reaching out to audience who can never visit your museum. This year, I collaborated with Great Ormond Street Hospital, which is a specialist hospital for children, to deliver a 3D printing project with young people in the bone marrow transplant wards. At Great Ormond Street, there are a great number of teenage patients in there. It's a leader in research into radiotherapy and chemotherapy for lymphoma, leukemia, and other rare childhood cancers. And we worked with the arts team there to really ensure that culture was accessible to all these young people. The students were kept in isolation. They were at high risk of infection, and so it meant they had very limited contact with anybody inside their rooms. So we worked to bring the collection to them and to have a creative experience. And so we used Scan the World. I don't know if many people are familiar with this project, but this is a crowdsourced collection of 3D models online, created by the public. It now features, I think, way over 10,000 sculptures from across the world, and you can download them and use them as you like. The licensing on a lot of these is still very much being negotiated. And many museums had no 3D scanning policy like they would have done for photography in the galleries. And I've been raising this point for a number of years at places I'd been working after seeing sculptures from our collections being 3D printed and sold online. But in the meantime, I took advantage of the lack of rules and policy, and engage the community to start to use our galleries to scan and collect the sculptures. Now the V&A has a pre-digitized collection which can be used in many different ways. Sometimes communities will just engage themselves with your collections to pursue their passions, and this is exactly what happened in this case. But it also really shows the power of free, open source, Creative Commons and crowdsourced culture in sharing your collections and encouraging participation. I think Lawrence Lessig, who created the Creative Commons license, put this so well when he said, "There is a different class of amateur creators that digital technologies have enabled, and a different type of creativity that has emerged as a consequence. This is a free gift to many who could pay for it, no doubt, but it's an extraordinarily valuable gift to many who could not, but still want to create." So within this project, we used tablets, which we could carry from room to room to work with individual patients. And these could be cleaned easily to minimize the risk of infection. And we used free and open source 3D programs and software, allowing patients to create their own sculptures, modify and remix the V&A's collections. Here you can see a couple of 17th century sculptures, which a patient has added to. She hadn't eaten solid food for 3 months as part of her chemotherapy treatment, and all she wanted was a beef burger. And so she decided to create a series of sculptures holding the things that she wanted the most when she got out of that room. So these included cheeseburgers and a pet pug dog. Following up on that project, I discovered that she was able to have both those things, which is very lovely. And the process of teaching this was very quick and easy. We wanted to take away the steps and fear about using 3D modeling. And so we used a type of virtual clay that people could stretch, pull, and squeeze to create new shapes and forms. However, with all technology, things do go wrong. And here, the printer seems to have become sentient and decided to do some of its own artistic creations. But this piece here was based from an extraordinary sculpture of a vulture, which was commissioned by Augustus the Strong, the Elector of Saxony, for the Japanese palace in Dresden. This commission is one of the great landmarks in ceramic history, where nearly 600 life-size animals were planned, and at least 458 were made. Work began in 1730, only 20 years after Meissen had become the first European factory to make porcelain in the Chinese manner. And the patient who created the 3D printed sculpture you can see had been reading Philip Pullman's His Dark Materials. And you may have seen The Golden Compass, the film, which was made out of that. And he started to create demons. He started to think about what if, as in The Golden Compass, where people have their own sort of spirit animals or demons which follow them around and sort of help them through life. What if creatures had those too? So this started a whole new way of looking at these sculptures, a new way of creating a world, and a new way for us to talk about the collections. And the feedback that we got from the project brought to light some of the key motivations, really, on bringing technology and thinking about digital participation. It brought culture to them, which they weren't able to use before, opened up new worlds, and created new possibilities for us as well to look at what we were doing. I was very pleased when the play worker in one of the wards noticed that she'd never thought she'd see teenagers so interested in 17th century sculpture. So to finish up, I'm going to come back to the idea of asking what kind of things do not change. What things are most important to you as a museum? And I thought I'd finish on this note from the graphic designer Karen Goldberg, where she said she thrived on collaboration and learned early on as an inspiring painter in art school that she couldn't picture herself poor and alone in the cold garrets smoking unfiltered Camels. I need heat, hot water, nice linens, and the sound of 2 hands clapping. And perhaps that's what we need to do when we think about digital engagement. We need to encourage people to support our audiences and to think about where we can meet their needs the most. So digital media is so much more than your social media, so much more than creating memes. so much more than your websites. It's still that very cornerstone of museums, which is human interaction. Okay, thank you.